find the right audience. And if you can find that niche, it will be a rewarding experience. But if you can't, that might very well mean it's the last game you develop. Hi, I'm Chalit. I am the game director at Mixed Realms. My main role is to determine the design, marketing, and feasibility of the games that we work on. Mixed Realms is a local game studio that has developed and published 3 titles to date. 2 of them are VR games, Sorrento VR and Hellsweeper VR. And the third title is like kind of a PC/Switch/PlayStation title called Golden Quest. VR games are basically games that are experienced through a VR hardware. So typically this means that you have a headset or 2 controllers. Some even go into like hand tracking and eye tracking, right? And the idea is that by putting this headset on, you're able to experience the world, the virtual world, in a very immersive manner. Sorrento VR, released in 2016, was a VR experience that puts you in the shoes of a cyber ninja. So you can imagine yourself as Neo from the Matrix. You're able to do crazy things like you can wall run, you can slide on the ground firing a gun in each hand, you can do somersaults, and to top it all off, you can even slow down time, so it makes for a very cinematic experience. The second title that we have is Hellsweeper VR, kind of a spiritual successor to Sorrento VR. We take away the cyber ninja component and we put you into the pits of hell. You fight against like hordes of grotesque demons. So the improvements over the original is that one, there's more realistic combat physics, and the second, there's this new gesture system, right, where you can summon spells or weapons at the flick of a wrist, and then you can combine them by slamming them together. So you could infuse a fireball into a sword and turn it into a flaming sword. The third title that we worked on is Golden Quest, that was released in 2022. So it's a roguelike deck building game where you build up a party of 3 heroes, you build up a deck of cards, and you're able to play these cards to do tactical combat on the grid. And it harkens back to games like Slay the Spire and Darkest Dungeon. It all started in 2008 with Swagsoft. Swagsoft is a mobile app and website development company focused on serving government bodies, MNCs, SMEs, and startups. So it was founded by my colleagues Eldrick and Cheong. At that point of time, smartphones were becoming more readily available to consumers, and they saw the opportunity to bring mobile applications and game services to companies. So after a string of successfully completed projects in Swagsoft, I was invited to work on a new venture that Eldrick and Cheong had in mind. So it was more focused on creating our own games IP rather than service work. So this happened in 2016, and that was really the start of the journey of Mixed Realms. At that point of time, also, the VR industry was a very new and nascent one, given the resources that we had at the point of time. So it was better to go into the VR market, and it made sense to do so. What we did was we shipped in our very first VR headset from the US, way before you could get it on the shelves locally. We started playing around with that, and that's how the journey began. So it usually starts with the market research and creating the vision of what the game should play like. Oftentimes it's guided by the game genres that we enjoy. So what we'll do is we'll think about what we liked about certain games, what we didn't like, things that we want to improve, or things that were lacking in other games. And then comes the process of pre-production, prototyping, actual development. This can take from months to years, depending on the scope of the game. On the marketing and business side, I think the reality is just that the VR market is just so much smaller than the PC or mobile game market. So that means you need to be absolutely sure that the game can hit the right note, find the right audience, and if you can find that niche, it will be a rewarding experience. But if you can't, that might very well mean it's the last game you develop. We're just about to have a meeting to discuss our next game, 13Z. We usually have these weekly discussions to go over what needs to be looked at and what we'll be doing in the coming weeks. This is part of my team. Over here we have Ting Shi. Ting Shi is our Chief Product Officer, responsible for ensuring the quality of our products. Over here you have Ko An. Ko An's our producer / technical artist. So anything of that nature goes through him. And over here we have Ming Hui. He's on the Swagsoft side, but he occasionally helps out with testing and things like that. So this is the very first headset that we got. It's a HTC Vive. A lot of memories of it, a lot of sentimental value to me. I remember a lot of late nights spent working with this headset and taking turns sharing this around. The thing about it is that it requires at least a 3x3 meter play space to really effectively test it. So in our previous office, it was really small and constricted. So I recall a lot of dents in the walls and a lot of bruised heads as we were trying to test it out. We moved over to the HTC Vive Pro. So when we got our hands on this, we found that it was an improvement in the sense that it comes with this headband and an audio headset. So it made wearing it a lot more comfortable and it made development a lot more accessible. So we were super excited to get our hands on the standalone headsets. So the difference, as you can see, there is no wire coming out of it. This made it very easy to bring around. Like you could show this off to your friends, put it on, play a game, take it off, and put it on charge. It's kind of a glimpse into the future of VR with how accessible it is. So looking at how the technology has improved over the years, how lightweight it can be, how much more accessible it can be, I'm really hopeful for the future of VR. Just as there are competitions for games like Counter-Strike, Valorant, or even physical airsoft matches, there is a VR equivalent for esports, where players move about physically in their play space. So for example, if they were peering around a corner, they would have to move their head to do so. If they were reloading their gun, they would have to mimic the motion of doing so, so on and so forth, right? And even just recently in Singapore, the Olympic esports tournament was held where a virtual taekwondo match happened. And it's crazy to think about, but it's kind of like really the beginning of what can imagine the possibilities of VR are. Well, for game developers, I feel like it is the dream to flesh out your own unique worlds and put life to your ideas. By creating our own IP, there's also the possibility for the IP to grow into something popular and take on a life of its own. It can be quite gratifying to see comments on the global stage where it's like, wow, I didn't know this game was developed in Singapore. With that said, it definitely has its own set of challenges. When we approach the development of a game, we need to think about it from the standpoint of developing a game for the global market and understanding where we stand amongst the competition. I think the interesting thing about the VR space is that unlike the PC and mobile space, in general, there is more room for creativity in terms of trying out new and unique mechanics. The idea of what a fun VR experience is constantly being rewritten as we see different interpretations of the same mechanic with every new game that comes out. So for example, when we first started off with Silento VR, the concept of being able to jump around, wall run, somersault, things like that, those were virtually unheard of. And in fact, it was even discouraged as it would lead to things like players feeling nauseous. But I take it as a point of pride that we actually experimented on that to prove that point wrong. I think if you focus on things like accessibility, you can really bring this experience to life. If you take all that into consideration, it's kind of like I can think back to each product or game that we've developed as kind of like an era in our life. I feel like I grew up in the golden age of gaming as a regular game-obsessed teenager. So I will attribute many of my influences and inspirations to the many games I've played growing up with my previous gaming group of friends. For example, over like schooling years, NS years, and even today, games like Left 4 Dead, Helldivers. I've even participated in the World Cyber Games for Left 4 Dead 2, although I didn't get very far. But actually, even before that, games came to me in the form of physical media. Choose Your Own Adventure game books. So these were books where you could read through and you could influence the path of the story. And there will be good endings and there will be bad endings. But basically the whole thing really fired up my imagination. I personally developed an interest in developing games as far back as in secondary school. I remember one of the very first few internet games that I was exposed to at the point of time was Neopets. And it was also the era of Flash game portals. Flash games were very trendy and ubiquitous back then. So the difference between VR and traditional games boil down to two main differences. One is the immersion factor. What I mean is that when you put your headset on and you peer around, we're actually looking at a virtual world, something that takes you away from the current reality that you're in. The second one is the option of physicality. So what this means is that if you see something interesting in the virtual environment, you can use your virtual hand to reach out and grab it. You can bring it to your face, you can inspect it. And this is a very different feeling from just using a mouse and controller and interacting with the game. So I would say it brings a whole new dimension of the idea of interacting with objects in the game. So this is down to very simple things like the angle of your virtual hand or virtual controller with relation to your actual hand. So when you actually reach out and grab something, it feels as natural as possible. Sometimes we do have to amp it up, right? So if they were to slice or bash something, we would apply a force. Like for example, if you uppercut an enemy, they will fly straight up into the air. But with that said, the whole point of VR is really to give experiences to the player that they can't experience in real life. Game development is a marathon and success isn't guaranteed. So I think the important thing is that you have to be content and fulfilled with the decisions that you make. And if you find your work meaningful, I think it makes the day-to-day a lot more enjoyable. So it's as much about the journey as it is the destination.